Hey, let's talk about creating your first web project. Recall that last class period we created a Photoshop prototype and we generated our images. This is step one right here. Following proper naming conventions, no spaces, lowercase, no special characters, use appropriate extension. We also created a local root folder, which we placed all those images into. They were JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs. We also launched Dreamweaver and defined our site, but we're going to review that today. In fact, after we do that, the big thing today is that we're going to create a basic structure of the page, like a footer, a header. Should have said that in the other order. A header, sections, and a footer. And then we're going to add content next class period, all our images and text. And then we'll be done with our first web page. So let's flop to Photoshop first. In fact, this image, this graphic right here is actually in Photoshop, so I'm just going to change my window. And you'll see there's only one layer. It's just one simple graphic. Remember to generate assets, you just go to File, Generate, and Image Assets. Make sure that's turned on. It is. And then the second I title these layers, like I might call this guidelines dot, since this has a gradient in it, maybe we'll do a PNG so it'll be nice gradient. If there was no gradient in this, it would probably be better as a GIF because it would be smaller. But actually it's typography, so if I was actually doing this for a web page, it would be type, it wouldn't be an image at all. So this is just for demonstration purposes. But now that I've put this extension on and I have my image generator turned on, wherever I have this Photoshop file saved, web process first project, it would put this guidelines.png right next to it in an assets folder. And to show you, that is how I generated all of these images. I've even broken them up into subfolders at this point, like all my icons are in there, my header graphics. For my images that go on the main pages, I changed my index pick a little bit because that one was funnier. So I have my basic local root folder. You can ignore this index and HTML. That's what we're going to make. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll show you that later. You'll see. We'll get there. Okay, we're ready to launch Dreamweaver. The important thing is we have our local root folder. We're ready to launch Dreamweaver and define our site. So, assets created, Dreamweaver there. First thing we do is go to Site, New Site, brings up this dialog box. We'll call this like my demo recording. And I'm calling it that because that's what I called my local root folder, but you can actually have a more descriptive title here. This is just for the site name is for Dreamweaver, really. The important thing is that you click this and you click your local root folder. You browse to your local root folder. And then when you click Save, what you should see under your little Files tab, if you don't see that, go to Window Files. Right there. You should see the contents of your local root folder, not your entire desktop, not your entire computer, just this stuff. This is super important because it makes sure that all your links stay correct, which is really important for websites, especially when they get complicated and you have a lot of images and a lot of pages. So you should just see your local root folder in here. The other tabs that I mentioned last time that I would have open are your Insert tab. It's right there at the top. And the CSS Designer tab, which is empty right now because we haven't got a first page yet. All right, to make our first page, we will go ahead, go to this drop-down window, right up here in the little corner, and I would recommend using this and doing File New, and we will do index.html and hit return. Okay, now I could have done that up here, but I caution you against that, simply because you need to make sure you remember to save it right away into your local root folder. There's no guarantee that it would end up in there if you don't actually pay attention to where you're saving it. If you do it right here in this little drop down, there is no way you can end up with your file outside of your local root folder. It will create it right in your local root folder. Just remember that you want to be on the top root, because your index should always be on the top root. It should not be in one of these subfolders. Okay. First file, always called index.html, always on the top root level. All right. So now that I created that, I can double click on it to open it. And I'm using a split view. So under my view menu, you see it split. If you have the newest version of Dreamweaver 2017, make sure that there might be a little thing up here. Yours will say you want it in your standard mode, not in your developer mode. So mine is in defaults because I have a slightly older version of Dreamweaver, but make sure it's in standard or default and you reset. It should look like this with the code at the bottom. This is the basic HTML page code. Very simple. And this is my little work area. I'm in live view, but I could also go in design view. It doesn't really matter at this point. It's not going to be that complicated of a page. What we're doing first is just setting up our basic regions, and then we'll add the content later. Next class period. Okay, so always make sure that you're paying attention to your code. Don't put your cursor up here because you don't exactly know where it's going to end up in your code view. It's just easier to come down here, drop your cursor. I'm going to hit return. So I'm in between my first body tag and my end body tag. This is where I want to put my header. Then I can go to my insert menu, just come down here, click header. When I do that, this little insert header dialog box shows up. I can give this thing a class. We'll talk about classes and IDs later, but for now, I will just call this demo header. Click new CSS rule. This box pops up. The first time this box pops up, it'll put, first of all, it'll put a period in front of demo header. I need to keep that. But importantly, I need to choose where the rule will be defined, where it's going to store my cascading style sheet rule. I'm going to make a new cascading style sheet. I'll go to new style sheet file. And then when I say OK, it'll ask me to name that. So something.css is what I should call it. So I'll call it demo record.css and click save after I confirm that it's in my site root, which it was. When I do that, it brings up this handy box, my CSS rule definition for my demo header. And here, I'm going to give my box a width of 1,000 because that's how much I need for my pictures, and a height of 100, again, because that was how much I measured out in Photoshop using the rulers. And make sure that you give it a background color. We'll take these off later, but just so we can see them on the screen, it'll be default with no background color, so you won't actually see anything if we don't give it a background color. So we will do background color. Oh, you know what else I should check on our box is we're going to go ahead and set the padding to 0 and the margin to 0. Okay, that's also under this little box tab. This is a really handy dialog box as it lets you flip through all the different properties that you could apply, like most of the basic ones. And we'll say OK. And we'll scroll up. Oh, and we have to say OK again. And there it is. There's our header. It even says content for class demo header goes here. Our content will be our buttons and our logo. All right. We'll keep that in there for now. Come down here. I'll hit return. Some things happened when I did that. I've created my first rule. So you probably saw that now I have this little demo record.css. There's my first rule on my style sheet, my demo header style sheet. That's how they're written. Dreamweaver does a great job of breaking up into color, so you can see the selector, you can see the property and its content, its attributes. So all those are color coded for you, or easy viewing. Let's see what else. Oh, now in our CSS designer, we can see we have our demo record.css. You can see the selectors we have on it. We our demo header. This is selector up here. And we can see all the properties that we can define and the values that we can give those properties. All right, that was the word I was looking for, value. All right. Some of them we've defined. We can change these if we want. Like I could take this and I could stretch it out. You can see my red graphic at the top stretching. Also note, as I'm doing that, you can see it changing here. You can change it wherever you want. You can change it here in your CSS designer. You can actually change the rule itself if you like typing. I'm going to set this back to 1,000 pixels. Oops, that's 100, Jeff. 1,000 pixels. Units are in pixels here, but there's other different units of measurement I can use later on. All right, let's add something else. We will add a section on the left there. Before I do this, I need to go back to my source code, make sure I have my cursor in the right spot, following my header because I want to put something here. I'm going to add a section. So click this once, brings up this dialog box. I'll call this section left, make it camel case. Click new CSS rule. That brings up this box. Again, keep that section left in there with a period. Here, I need to make sure I go to my demo record.css, my style sheet that I've made for this project. All right, that will be listed in there. It'll be the only one listed. And then click OK. Again, this brings up this box. I'll go background. I'm going to give this like a gray, dark gray, no, light gray, no, dark gray. Do this one dark gray. And a box. I'm going to give this a width of 400 and a height of 600. And for now, I'm going to set the padding to 0 and the margin to 0, but we're going to have to change these once we put type in this box. This is for our type on the left because we're not going to want the type butted up against the edge. Okay. And I did a background color. Yes. All right. There's our section left. If you want to turn off your split view at any point and just do live view, you can. Okay, we'll have to do that in a minute. All right, we're ready for something else. Again, with the cursor, we're going to go to line 12 here. That's our next available line. I'm going to do another section. Brings this up. I'll call this section bright. Use CSS rule. Brings this guy up. We're going to put this in demo record. Now it knows. It's got me figured out and knows I want to use this demo record.css. That will be the default pick. I can say OK. And again, in this box, we'll do background of light gray. This time, we will do a box size of 600 wide and 600 tall. And again, with the padding, we'll do 0. This one I won't actually need any padding. So we will not have to change these. And say OK. Now you'll see something interesting happen here. And you might think, oh, where to go? Look at this. What? It's stacked under there. Not cool. But that is OK. That is what we would expect to happen because this is how your browser works. It just stacks stuff from top to bottom. Unless you're putting images in there. If you put images in a defined space, if there's room for the image, it will keep going left to right until it hits the end of the container, and then it'll start on the next line. But when you're with your basic page structure, it will do this. Now, obviously, we don't want this. We want this light gray box over here, and then our footer down here. That's no big deal. What we need to do is add a float property or a float value. All right. We are going to float both this box, the dark gray, and float the light gray one. And we'll see. We're actually going to float the dark gray one first, and what you'll see is this thing move up to take this position. So Now we can go to our CSS designer and start modifying things. So on my demo record.css, I have 3 rules now. Section left was my dark gray. Confirm that because when I click on it, it selects on the screen, plus I have a dark gray. It's my background color. But one of the important attributes is the float thing right down here. If I click on this float left, you will see that my section right box is up here now, except it's buttressed all the way over to this left. Is that the word? It's all the way over to this left edge, and I need it over here in this space. That is not a problem. Eventually I would make a container for this that's 1,000 pixels wide. We're going to do that at the very end. And that would solve a lot of things because then I could float this one right and it would go up against the container. If I float this one right now, watch what happens. So we'll go to section right and we'll click float right. It plops way over there. So don't worry, the container will help that. But for now, all we're going to do with this instead of floating it right is just float it left. And it will pop into that spot that's next available. Sounds a little weird, but when you float something, you take it out of its normal stacking order that you saw when we first stuck these things in there, how it was stacked top to bottom. All right, so float property, very important. All right, had to use it for both these things. All right, last thing is a footer. We'll be set. So again, insert menu. There's this thing called a footer. Oh, before I do that, shoot, you know what I forgot to do? Got to go back into my split view, make sure I'm in the right spot. That's why I brought up that new dialog box, because I was not in the right spot. So I'm going to go to line 13 here, make sure my cursor is blinking there, it is, and then footer. All right, again, this thing pops up. I'll call this my demo footer. Now we'll talk about if you've done HTML before in CSS and you're like, why doesn't he just use the HTML footer tag? So that's a long answer. We will do that later. We'll talk about the difference between HTML tag rules, class rules, ID rules, compound rules, all the different kinds of rules that you can create and different selectors that you can create. Okay, new CSS rule, again with this thing. Demo record.css is our style sheet we want to use. It's called demo footer with a period because it's a class. We say OK. Comes up with this guy. We are going to do a background of blue because I want to show you. Again, we'll change all these once we have content in them. But for now, we want to be able to see where they are on the screen. And we'll say 1,000 pixels wide. In fact, you know what? For now, I'm going to make it 1,020 just because I want you to be able to see the little tab sticking out at the end. And a height of we're going to do 100 as well. All right, and then padding for now, 0, 0, and OK, and OK. All right, now you can see there it is. It's got a little highlighted blue. It's over there. What the? It's over there because it's the previous thing, this light gray section right box was floated, which makes the thing that comes up next to it, under it, float as well. So it's going up and taking the spot over here. Not what I want. I want it down here. Curiously, the content is down there. It says content for class demo footer goes here because it's getting pushed down by this stuff, even though the box is up there. Now, ideally, I want the box here, that footer box, and I want my content there. Even though this might work once I put content in there because it'll stack under here, it looks odd to me. So again, CSS Designer, here's another thing I want to talk about. So we click on Demo Footer and we'll see the attributes and properties and values we have there. This is a slightly different thing. On my footer, I can uncheck that float and it will go away. I can also just say that I want to clear my left things as well. In fact, if I put no float on this and make sure I have all my floats cleared, it will take all the previous floats that I've set up here off and ignore them. So the fact that I have a float applied to this light gray box will not make this thing pop up there, just as you see, because I've just gone and cleared them. All right, I've cleared my left, you can clear your right, you can clear both. If you don't remember, go ahead and clear them both, it won't hurt anything. I can go ahead and clear them both in case I put a float right on this later on. All right, and there we have our basic page structure. If we were to look at the HTML structure will follow the look of the page. You know, the section left and section right, you know, are the same distance from the top, but we'll see the header at the top, our sections in the middle, and our footer at the bottom. There are other insert things that you might find very helpful. This is one for navigation. We can nest these if we want to. In fact, we could nest a navigation one inside the footer because we will have our social media icons down there. Let's go ahead and just do that. So if I want to do that, I could select this stuff in here. Like that, and click navigation. Now this will be a slightly different dialog box. It will say wraparound selection because I actually have a selection, and that's fine that I want to wrap around there. It'll end up inside the footer. I can say this is what I want this will be my social media nav. And this will be a fairly small box. I again want this to be on my demo record.css. I can say OK. And I'll give this box a width of I'm going to just say 500 for now. We can change that. And a height of 50. And for now, I'm going to set the padding and the margin to 0 so we can change those values and you can see how these start to work. Okay. Oh, and background color, we'll make this green. All right, you can see it right there. I will be able to use the padding to move this away. I'm going to put my icons in there when it's ready. But let's go ahead and just move this demo footer a bit so that we want it centered. So CSS Designer, there's my nav box. If I take my margins and I change my left margin, just drag it, watch what happens. Whoop. It's like that. That's very centered. I could do math. It won't look centered exactly yet because and let's do the top one. Oops, I hit that click thing right there. I did not mean to do that. Let's go ahead and set it back to normal here for a minute. Do my margin left, my top margin down a little bit. All right, that one's not working because of the whole floating thing. That's okay. We'll hit the little thing for there. It is no biggie. We also need to fix our demo footer because it's too long. Now we don't need the little piece sticking out, so I'm going to make this 1,000. All right, we can adjust any rule we want. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different selectors, 5 different rules. We can check our page right now. We need to save this page. I'm going to hit Command S on my keyboard. And there are rules. Look at that. So we have our style sheet. We have our source code, which is index.html. We have demo record.css. This page needs this style sheet to work, so I cannot remove that from my local root folder. And we're ready for some content. I'm going to do save one more time, make sure everything's saved, and go ahead and quit. Next step, adding content.